The black belt asked the black janitor to spar with him for fun. What happened next silenced the entire martial arts gym. "Hey, you there cleaning, how about a quick demonstration?" shouted Derek Mitchell from the center of the mat, his black belt gleaming under the gym's fluorescent lights. "I bet you've never seen a real fight in your life, right?" James Washington stopped mopping the floor and slowly looked up. At 42, he had been working as a janitor at that gym for only 3 weeks, always arriving after hours, when the students had already left. But on that Thursday night, the advanced classes training had gone past the usual time. "I don't want to bother you, Sensei," James replied calmly, returning to scrubbing a stubborn stain on the floor. "Just finishing up here so you can get back to it." Derek let out a loud, theatrical laugh that echoed through the gym. "Everyone, look at this! The guy's afraid to even step on the mat." The 8 students present laughed nervously, some clearly uncomfortable with the situation. What Derek didn't know was that James had spent the last 20 years trying to completely forget who he really was. 20 years since he left the ring after an accident that changed his life forever. 20 years keeping a secret that not even his teenage daughter knew about. "Come on, man," Derek continued, approaching him with that arrogant smile he used to intimidate beginners. "Just a little demonstration. I bet you don't even know how to do a basic guard. How about showing my students the difference between someone who trains and someone who just cleans?" James felt that familiar sensation in his chest, like a dormant muscle being awakened after years of inactivity. His eyes met Derek's briefly, and for a split second, something passed between them that made the instructor take an involuntary step back. "Just an educational demonstration," Derek insisted, now trying to hide the sudden uncertainty in his voice. "Nothing too serious, just to show the beginners why it's important to respect the martial art." James set the bucket on the floor and stood up slowly. His movements had a fluidity that was strange for someone who has supposedly never stepped on a tatami mat before. Around the gym, the students stopped training, realizing that something was happening. "All right," James said finally, his voice calm like the surface of a lake before a storm. "But when we're done, you're going to apologize to all of them for turning the mat into a circus." Derek laughed, but this time the sound was a little forced. "Apologize, man. You'll be the one apologizing to the floor when you meet it." What none of them knew was that James Washington had once been James Silent Storm Washington, 5-time world mixed martial arts champion. He had retired at the height of his career after an accident that cost the life of his best friend and training partner. Since then, he had sworn never to fight again. But some promises are made to be broken when dignity is at stake. The unstable base that compromised his balance. The excessive tension in his shoulders that telegraphed every move before it even began. "Still waiting?" Derek sneered, hopping lightly on his feet. "Or are you just going to stand there like a lamppost?" That's when James did something no one expected. He started to move. It wasn't a dramatic change, just a subtle repositioning of his feet, a slight lowering of his center of gravity, his shoulders relaxing into a perfectly horizontal line. But to anyone who knew what to look for, the transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. Sarah Chun felt a chill run down her spine. In 2 years studying sports biomechanics, she had analyzed hundreds of hours of footage of great fighters. What she had just witnessed was the transition from an ordinary man to a born predator, a change as subtle as it was devastating. "Interesting," Derek muttered, his confidence wavering for the first time. There was something about the way James occupied the space now that awakened every self-preservation instinct he had. James took a single step forward, and Derek instinctively backed away. The movement was so involuntary, so primitive, that several students noticed. A black belt retreating from a janitor. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. "Problem?" James asked softly, his voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced everyone. Derek felt the blood rush to his cheeks. His reputation was being questioned in front of his own students. He couldn't back down now, even though every fiber of his being screamed at him to stop and apologize. "No problem," Derek replied, forcing a smile. "Just admiring your posture. Did someone teach you that on YouTube?" The joke fell flat. No one laughed. The tension in the room had become almost tangible. "Actually," James said calmly, "I learned it at a place called the Las Vegas National Gym. Maybe you've heard of it." Derek frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Las Vegas? What kind of weekend boot camp did you do there?" Sarah Chun discreetly pulled her phone from her pocket and typed Las Vegas National Gym Martial Arts. What she found made her blood run cold. It wasn't a boot camp. It was the legendary training ground where the world's greatest mixed martial arts champions of the last 3 decades had honed their craft. "Derek," James continued, his voice still calm, "last chance. Apologize to Sarah for questioning her right to speak. Apologize to your students for turning this place into a circus. And most of all, apologize to yourself for becoming exactly the kind of person martial arts should teach you not to be." The offer of clemency hung in the air like smoke. Derek could have chosen humility. He could have preserved what little dignity he had left. Instead, he attacked. Derek's first punch was technically perfect, a fast, accurate jab executed exactly as he had practiced for years. It was the kind of punch that worked against 99% of the people he sparred with. James wasn't in the 99%. The movement was so fast, so fluid, that half the onlookers couldn't even process what had happened. James simply wasn't where Derek's fist had been aimed. His body had flowed to the side like water around a rock. Suddenly, Derek was off balance, his arm extended into thin air. "Nice try," James commented softly, "already repositioned and perfectly balanced. Clean technique, adequate speed, but you telegraphed the move with your right shoulder." Derek spun, confused. How had someone moved so fast? "Beginner's luck," he muttered to himself more than to James. The second attack came in quick succession. Jab, straight, hook. 3 punches executed with mechanical precision.
It was Derek's favorite sequence, the one that usually ended sparring sessions and impressed beginners. Again, James simply wasn't there. This time, Sarah managed to follow the movement. James had lowered himself slightly, allowing the jab to pass inches above his head. The straight missed completely as he leaned back with impossible control. And when Derek threw the hook with full force, James took a small step back, just enough for the fist to slice through empty air. "Interesting combination," James observed, still breathing evenly. "Works well against people who stand still, but you're leaving your left side completely exposed." After the hook, Derek was sweating. This wasn't normal. He had landed thousands of punches in his life, and now he couldn't land one on a man who supposedly never fought before. "Stop dancing and fight," Derek shouted, launching an even more aggressive sequence. That's when James decided the demonstration had gone on long enough. Derek's third attack, a desperate flurry of punches and kicks, found only air. But this time, something different happened. When Derek recovered from his missed blows, James was inexplicably closer. "How?" Derek whispered, realizing he had completely lost control of the distance. "Derek," James said softly, now an arm's length away, "do you want to know the difference between someone who learned to fight in gyms and someone who learned in professional rings?" Before Derek could answer, James did something that defied everything those present thought they knew about physics. Without appearing to use any force, without aggression or visible effort, he simply touched Derek's chest with the palm of his right hand. Derek flew. He wasn't pushed or shoved. He was propelled backward as if struck by an invisible wave. His feet left the ground. He traveled nearly 2 meters through the air and landed hard on his back, the impact echoing through the silent gym. The silence that followed was absolute. Derek lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what had just happened. There was no pain, only the overwhelming realization that he had faced someone operating on a completely different level. "That," Derek muttered, struggling to sit up, "that's impossible." Sarah Chan had stopped breathing. In 2 years of studying martial arts, she had never witnessed such a controlled and devastating display of power. There was no brutality, no anger, just the precise application of perfect technique. "Actually," James said calmly, reaching out to help Derek to his feet, "it's quite simple. Once you understand leverage, timing, and energy transfer, principles I learned over a 22-year professional career." Derek ignored the outstretched hand and stood on shaking legs. 22 years? Professional career in what? Sarah answered before he could. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't understand who he is, do you?" Everyone turned toward her. She was holding her phone, the screen glowing with search results, dozens of articles, photos, and videos confirming what her instincts already knew. James Washington, also known as Silent Storm, 5-time world mixed martial arts champion, considered one of the most technically skilled fighters in history, retired undefeated after a 22-year career following an accident that resulted in the death of his training partner. The words hit the room like a bomb. Derek's face went pale as reality sunk in. He had challenged a living legend. He had mocked a man who could have destroyed him with a single move. Five-time world champion? Derek stammered, his arrogance evaporating instantly. James nodded. I retired at 29. Since then, I've just been working wherever I can. Cleaning, maintenance, simple jobs, simple life. No spotlight, no cameras, no need to prove anything to anyone. The transformation in Derek was painful to watch. The arrogant man was gone, replaced with someone who finally understood the magnitude of his ignorance. I didn't know. If I had known, would I have treated you with respect? James interrupted gently. Or would you have still humiliated some other janitor, someone without credentials to defend themselves? The question hit harder than any punch. Derek realized that James had placed his finger on the root of his real problem. It wasn't ignorance about his credentials, but the fundamental arrogance that made him believe he could humiliate people based on their professions. Sarah stepped forward, her voice firm. Sensei Derek, for 2 years I have trained at this academy out of respect for your experience. But what I witnessed today was not teaching. It was bullying disguised as instruction. Other students began to murmur in agreement. The revelation about James had completely changed everyone's perspective on what they'd witnessed. James, Derek said finally, his voice laden with the humility no one there had ever heard before, I sincerely apologize to you, to Sarah, to everyone here. I have no excuse for my behavior. James nodded, accepting the apology with the same grace with which he had mastered the physical confrontation. Appreciated, Derek. But apologies are only the first step. The question is, what are you going to do differently from now on? Derek looked around the room, seeing his students with new eyes. Some seemed disappointed in his behavior. Others were clearly reevaluating everything they thought they knew about respect and hierarchy. I'll change, Derek promised. It'll take time, but I'll change. That's when Sarah asked a question that surprised everyone. Mr. Washington, would you consider teaching again? Because I think we could all learn a lot more from someone who understands that true strength comes with responsibility. James smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him that night. Maybe, but not to teach fighting techniques. To teach something much more important, that respect isn't earned with belts or titles, but with character. As Derek fully absorbed the most humiliating lesson of his life, one question hung in the air. Would one night of humility be enough to transform decades of arrogance, or would an even deeper change be necessary for true justice to be served?